I recently left Tala, so as of Friday, so actually I'm starting a couple new endeavors involving blockchain and AI, so if there's any AI or blockchain experts in the audience that want to make some money, let me know after my talk. So my background, as we mentioned before, I won't spend a lot of time on this. I launched the API program at FedEx, went into the innovation group in FedEx and came up with this idea called SenseAware that is an Internet of Things device that you put in a package, and that was launched in 2011. That is a sensor that does GPS, location. It also does temperature and light sensor and all these types of sensors that uploads to a dashboard. So that's been around a lot of years now. And then one of the things in 2013 that we were thinking about at FedEx that I was involved in as well was blockchain. And this is because Bitcoin came out, right? Bitcoin, once we looked at the underlying technology of Bitcoin, that was blockchain, and that was very interesting. That was actually more interesting than Bitcoin to me at the time. And then the reason, the previous presentation gave you all the reasons why that's interesting. I won't go into that, but I'll tell you kind of how we implemented some of this at Tala. And then starting at the end of 2015 and 2016, helped launch Tala for a couple years, and then I'm launching some new things now. So kind of the types of things we looked at FedEx are pretty interesting. They involved, drones, smart cities, autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, and mobile at the time was really, really interesting. So this presentation's for executives and entrepreneurs mainly, and people thinking about this sort of space. I'm not an AI expert talking about exploring innovation. I'm more of an innovation expert looking at AI and blockchains. So I'll just preface that, there won't be a lot of math. So the big picture, let's kind of start into the big picture where we talk about AI, why is it interesting, and the revenue part of the title of this is when we're talking about AI, it's really, the way I use it is it's this umbrella term. There's a lot of experts that'll tell you a lot of different things, but the way I usually use it is this sort of branch of computer science focused on getting computers to exhibit intelligence. Under that you have machine learning, and under that you have like what they call deep learning, which is just machine learning with some additional layers of nodes for machine learning. For an executive or anyone thinking about AI, more like me on the business side, I spend more time looking at like pattern recognition and prediction. Those are the two categories of use cases for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is really good at lowering the cost of making predictions and also doing pattern recognition. So those are the kind of the business things, and there's just tons of things under that. It's always connected to automation because making a decision happens right before an autonomous process kicks off, or making some sort of pattern recognition is a good way to kick off some sort of action. So we often talk about automation when we talk about AI, and I'll be mainly talking about narrow AI. There is what's known as general AI, which you see in science fiction movies. So artificial general intelligence is where, at some point we will get to the point of creating a digital assistant or a digital person, a brain at some point. None of that works right now, so I'm really talking about narrow AI, which is pattern recognition around visual, pictures and images and videos, text. It's good for natural language and those sorts of things. Natural language understanding, not natural language generation. So narrow, which means mainly within narrow bands of capabilities, maybe a narrow band of like use cases. So the AI market, we talked about revenue in the title, $2 billion now going to $60 billion. I'm sort of preaching to the choir to say that AI is going to be big, so I won't spend a ton of time on that. But yeah, AI is one of the things that's taking off, and I'm going to connect this to blockchain later in the presentation too, since this is sort of an AI and blockchain presentation, which is kind of where we spent the last couple of years working on. So tech is dominating. If you look at kind of some stats I pulled, you can kind of go back and look at 2006 versus 2016. And one of the things I noticed when I looked at this data is we went from like oil to, you had 3 oil companies up here in the top companies as far as size based on market capitalization. And then you moved over here. So we kicked a lot of the oil off, and we brought in companies that deal in data. Also, consumer chatbots are here, so they're getting more prominent, especially as they're coming into our homes. So I would call this a chatbot as well. Chatbots are often just sort of an interface to showing text to a person, maybe on a phone or on a screen. Also, you can have voice chatbots. So this is kind of the beginning of that. And as you can tell, they're not particularly smart yet if you use chatbots, but they're improving. And so the size of the industry is pretty good now, right? So if you look at blockchain or you look at AI, this is machine intelligence out of Bloomberg data, kind of map of companies that are in the machine learning space. Over here is our little area for Tala, professional intelligent agents that work at companies. So trying to build digital workers for white collar work of the future. That was our goal. It's still our goal there. And then you can kind of look at where the big companies and where the small companies are starting to focus and comments they're making. So if you look at the CEO of Amazon and Google, they're focusing a lot of efforts on AI. They're utilizing this technology as well. So I wrote an article about a year ago called "The Data is the New Oil" or something along those lines. And so that's kind of one of the things that's feeding this is a lot of data. And I'll talk about it a little bit later in the presentation. Data plus a couple other things is kind of where you can create opportunities for AI. And so I think we're moving into the intelligent automation age. You can kind of build out from the beginning of, you had the internet before 1995, and then 1995, roughly 1994, you had a browser come out which created the web on top of the internet, right? And then you had social and collaborative type companies based on kind of movements and improvements in technology and mobile and GPS and all that allowed you to create like Uber and some of those types of companies. And then intelligent automation were sort of the beginning of that. But I think that last phase, that 2015, that actually has kind of sub-phases. So I wouldn't expect right when we hit 2015, 2016 for everything to be automatic. It's really more assisted right now, right? It's most of the startup AI companies have somebody pretending to be a bot on the other end as well, right? Because they're using that to train the bots. Yeah, I joked around a lot about that a couple years ago when we started Tala and we were looking at all the bot companies, and I'm like, everybody working at these companies is just pretending to be bots. It's like, in 10 years, everybody's going to be confused as to why everything's automated, but everybody seems to have a job. It'll just be everybody pretending to be bots talking to each other. But the theory behind that is relevant that these companies are doing. So they're using artificial intelligence to look at these conversations between people inside of kind of narrow bands of trying to accomplish certain tasks. And they're using that data to make the machine better. So it starts taking over a larger and larger percentage of those conversations over time. So I think also each of these phases sort of had an interface change. So you had kind of a web browser interface here. Social use the smartphone, and then AI is sort of what I call a hybrid AI, and that's where that AI interface, one of the interfaces will be sort of AI. Another interface I would argue is more like an overlay on your software. So I think we'll have sort of a augmented reality type experience on your computer where you've got a software running on top of another software, augmenting kind of what you're doing with it. It may not be chatting with you, but it may be prompting you to do things. So that's just a theory. So right now we're in the phase of this where we're augmenting people, we're not replacing them, right? So we are, as I mentioned before, so augmented reality or virtual reality is sort of just a layer, and as we add AI into that, and we even create metaphors like I mentioned on the computer, where I've really got assisted AI. It's an AI that is understanding the ambient nature of all this data that I don't understand because humans have limited bandwidth, but it doesn't. So it's going to be jumping in at the right time and right place, kind of augmenting your experience with software and in the general world. So what do I mean when I say a bot? We throw that term around a lot. I think long term, so short term we have bots, and then we throw this around a lot when we talk about bots. So a lot of different definitions. I'll tell you what I mean when I say bot. I mean either RPA, robotic process automation, which is like a set of steps in a computer doing work. Generally this is big in the business world, right, where you've got it's like if then that on steroids, and it's getting into a lot of different businesses, and you have these prescribed steps to do all sorts of activities. It takes over a screen perhaps and types it in as if there's a person sitting at the screen, does those sorts of things in order. You can start layering in AI at certain steps in a robotic process automation set of steps where it's making decisions. For example, you could use robotic process automation inside of a workflow inside of your company to understand if a human, you do sentiment analysis, right? So your company gets an email, it does sentiment analysis to see how mad the email is, like is there emotion involved in this email? And then it may route it to a different person inside of your company based on emotion. That's a very simple workplace automation bot use case. But it doesn't necessarily have a chat bot. It's not talking to a human, it's just this thing making a decision that's independent. And that's what we mean by bot. And then we also mean chatbots, which everybody sort of already understands. Bots that talk to humans in some way. And then the 10 principles of intelligent agent design. I came up with this when I was heading product for Tala. So this is kind of the way I think about design and how I combine that with intelligent agents of the future. So what I would want to do is have them useful, context-aware, able to learn, adaptable and be able to communicate, proactive, respectful of privacy, honest, transparent, and non-malevolent. So kind of bringing those together, I think right now kind of embodies what I think of as good design when we're talking about creating an intelligent agent. An intelligent agent to me is just a bot 10 or 20 years from now when they get more and more intelligent. So right now we've got kind of prescribed steps and maybe a little AI sprinkled in. You know, you can kind of think forward 10 years and see that they'll be making more and more decisions on their own and communicating with each other and doing things like that. So that's the beginning of kind of my design thoughts. So back to kind of going beyond kind of the revenue and the big picture, I want to talk about, for the last half of the presentation, the problems with bots and AI, because that's where it starts getting kind of interesting, right? So this kind of gives us opportunities and things to think about to fix. So we can think about improving AI, improving bots. Those are hard problems that we're working on. But also, as we're doing that, we're creating problems that we need to solve along the way. So one thought I have around AI is data monopolies, and that simply means sort of, are we going to end up with, is AI the sport of kings? So one of the things I think about from an AI startup perspective and a blockchain startup perspective, but from an AI startup perspective, there's three things that seem to help you be a really good AI company and create a really good AI product, and that's data, processing, and talent, right? And who has the data? A lot of the large companies have most of the data. If you think of Facebook and Google. Processing power, they're going to get to that sooner than later. You've got the large companies are purchasing the next phase in chip design and all those kind of companies that are going to create faster and faster computing power. And then talent, you can recruit talent by offering them more money at a big company than you can at a startup. So do we need some sort of data neutrality in the future, right? Do we have some sort of thought process in the future where we combine some sort of, like our data is really some sort of public good, and then the companies are really accessing that and we're allowing them? Or are we just giving it to them and they think they own the data because we gave it to them, that kind of a thing. So I think there's a really interesting discussion over the next few years around whose data is it, even if I give it to you, is it still sort of mine, and how do we work that out in the commons? And those are good thoughts to think about around blockchain as well, because blockchains are really good for digital commons. That's kind of what they are to some degree. So data monopolies, that's the first thing I think about, especially doing an AI startup. The advantages are to the large companies, and should we think about that a little bit? AI bots are unpredictable. So the other thing you think about when you think about a bot or an intelligent agent, you've got an independent piece of software that's making decisions on its own. That's kind of the fundamental thought of this thing getting smarter. And it may be making sub-second decisions in the future, right? It may be making some decision that impacts your life in less than a second with no humans involved. So this is an example of Coast Runners where Google and OpenAI went and trained this bot to play this video game, right? A human would play this game, and it beats humans now 80% of the time, but it doesn't beat the humans in a way that you would think. You're supposed to race this boat around this lake to win the game, and the AI was giving the goal of, hey, get as many points as you can, that's how you win. So if you asked a human, they would try to race, and the bot figured out that it could just run over these little green things where it gets points. And so it just started going in circles and beating humans points-wise. So the issue you have here is this is fun in a game, but like when you bring this into industry and those kind of things and you say, manufacture paper clips or whatever, you know, it may decide that there's a lot of creative ways it can do that. So we have to kind of understand as we make AI more intelligent that it sort of behaves within parameters that we hope. And it hasn't right now, right? When we train it on games, it doesn't. And this is kind of one of those examples. The other example that we all know of is Tay, where Microsoft put Tay out on Twitter, and they thought it would just be fun and cool, and then humanity trained it badly. So now that I've talked about all these crazy things that can happen, we're trying to sell these things to put them in your company where you work. So that's kind of where I started thinking about, ready or not, here come the digital employees. We're trying to make digital employees. We know that they don't always behave well, you know, in the wild, and then we're bringing them into your office. We're selling them to you. So, so we need to manage them, and that's where, when I was head of product at Tala, we came up with BOTCHAIN, which is a platform for bots to be able to sort of start putting some guidelines around all intelligent agents. And so what is BOTCHAIN? BOTCHAIN is bot identity, so it allows a bot to validate the identity of another bot. So that would be, for example, you're not talking to a hacker bot or whatever, you're about to do some transaction in the future, and you can validate that it's really Macy's bot or whatever bot you think you're talking to. We also think bots will talk to other bots, so this will allow, as 2 or more bots or 50 bots get together, they can validate each other's IDs before they start doing a lot of transactions. And then I think transaction-wise, from an identity perspective, one thing that we'll work on in the future is allowing bots to negotiate with each other. I think that'll be a very common use case. So you've got a bunch of bots getting together, negotiating some outcome, storing that outcome on the blockchain, going away and doing something else. And that could be a financial transaction, it could be a lot of different things. Bot audit trail, so that's kind of where you're storing a hash of a bot decision on the blockchain, so you can see if it was tampered with. So we've got a lot of laws around being able to tell what AI, why AI made a certain decision or why your company made a certain decision. We can create a hash of that and put it on the blockchain where if the government comes and asks to see the data, you can't change it retroactively. You can't go back and change your records to say, you know, because we created a hash of it, you can actually go back and validate that the data that was created at the moment that the bot made a decision is the same and it wasn't tampered with in any way. So that's the second thing. And we built these first two, bot identity and bot. These are the two things that we've designed and built into it already. So, and then marketplace, this is a decentralized network that'll be owned by all bot companies. This won't be owned by Tala. And that'll be, you know, the marketplace and the rest of this, the new things that'll be come up that I haven't come up with yet will be built onto here as more people join and kind of build things on top of this bot chain. And so, yeah, I think blockchain is really good. I've talked a little bit about blockchains before, and you heard a really good talk right before me. I think they're really good commons, creating a commons type company. And what I mean by that is I think a really good use case for it is if you have an industry that has shared data, that's a really good use case for a blockchain. In other words, I don't want to trust you and you don't want to trust me, and we can kind of build an economy in the middle where the data is shared amongst ourselves, and that's kind of what BOTCHAIN is kind of beginning. So for this particular industry. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up, that's my last slide, is really talk about we talked about rights in the, and thinking about rules and rights and all these sorts of things and how we can handle AI in the future. A really interesting thing that when I'm thinking about GDPR, so the last thing I did at Tala was work on GDPR, kind of getting the company ready. And a couple things jumped out to me that I found were pretty interesting. One is there's a couple different concepts showing up in law in the world, in Europe, and I'm sure it'll be in the US soon, around data. And one of them was the right to be forgotten. I think that's a really interesting concept, and I think there's a lot of interesting implications of what does that really even mean, right? So if I have a search engine, I have to, and you say, well, here's the person, don't ever save their data. I have to save the person's data somewhere to know to delete it when it's spidered next time. So there's a lot of really interesting things that I don't see written into the law that are use cases that are just going to have to probably go to court at some point to get understanding for. Like, please delete this person out of all of your databases is something now that people can request in Europe. And I'm not sure exactly what that means. If you're a SaaS company and you get a request from someone in Europe and you're a third party that holds HR data for somebody or something like that, okay, no, I can't delete it because whose data is that? Is that your data? Is that their data? I think there's things to be worked out on that. Right to be forgotten, and blockchain technology is interesting as well, because if you've got blockchains are built to be immutable. So, with BOTCHAIN, we designed it so that we don't store any personal data on the blockchain. We only store it off-chain. So I do think there are ways to have an off-chain type thing that personal data can be deleted from. We just haven't designed it yet. So blockchain as its core blockchain is designed where there is no request to make of anyone. Also, these laws are interesting because they're based around making a request of a company. And BOTCHAIN is not owned by a company. You can send us an email, but we just launched it open source to the world, and it's run on a bunch of nodes. So I'm not really clear on who the government is going to serve all the paperwork to delete private data or not. And then right to an explanation is another interesting one where you get into AI. And that is sort of like, we don't always know why AI makes decisions, right? A lot of times it's a set of weights in a neural net that is making a decision based on a lot of numeric weights, and it doesn't necessarily have the capability to tell you why exactly it made that particular decision. So I think there's a lot of interesting kind of privacy things coming up that are all valid discussions, but I think we're just starting the discussion on those. And speaking of discussion, we have a couple minutes left. Let's jump into Q&A if there's any questions from the audience.